Well, hi, good morning. Yeah, Amias, how are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for coming to Washington, D.C.
Well, thanks for having us here. Actually, if you could give a quick introduction by yourself, that'd be great.
Sure, great. So my name is Amias Gerety. I'm a partner here at QED Investors. I've been here about 7.5 years. Before that, I spent 8 full years at the U.S. Treasury Department. So I joined literally the first day of the Obama administration. I left literally the last day. So my resignation was effective noon on Inauguration Day in 2017, and I was sworn in the morning after inauguration in 2009.
That's amazing. That's quite a story. You don't normally hear a lot of folks that come from the regulatory realm to go into VC. How'd that happen for you?
So, I would say like there's 3 paths to venture. There's sort of like you can work your way up at a big firm. You can get or be rich, right? A lot of venture capitalists or just have family money, or dumb luck, and I would put myself in the third category. So when I was at Treasury, I was what was called the acting assistant secretary for financial institutions. So that meant basically getting yelled at by everybody. So the small banks would come in and yell about, consumer, and the big banks would yell about bond market liquidity, and you name it. And but as part of that, naturally, fintech was one of the big things that was happening. So I had sort of gotten to know the fintech ecosystem, and it wasn't actually until after I left, so March of 2017, so 2 months after I left Treasury, that I met the folks at QED. And for reasons that are a little bit mysterious, they sort of said, well, have you thought about becoming an investor? And in general, my attitude was, yeah, it sounds like fun. It looks like what you, it looks like the thing you choose when you've already made it. But they were interested in having me on board, so I joined in June of 2017.
Wow, amazing. And can you tell me a little bit more about QED?
Yeah, absolutely. So, at QED, we are now a large global fintech-focused venture firm, and there really aren't many, if any, other than us in this context. We can invest as early as pre-seed. We often do incubations. The core of what we do is to lead Series A's. But we also have a growth vehicle, so we can come in at the C and D as well, if that's the right way to get into the best companies. We are, about 50% of the team in the US. We have a very big Latin American presence, partly because the first ever investment we did in LATAM was Nubank. Oh, wow. So, if you're going to do a great deal, make it your first one. Yeah. We also have been active in Europe for a long time. And then more recently, in the last couple of years, we've added exposure to India, Asia ex-China, and also Africa and the Middle East. So we are now fully a global firm.
Wow. So I actually that's quite an amazing story. And how so going back to so if you joined at the beginning of the Obama administration, you were there when all hell was breaking loose.
All hell was breaking loose. Yeah. So I was literally just to give you a feel for it. And a lot of people, like in venture and startup land, people don't remember because they were in high school in 2008, if that. Yeah. But there was a day in February of 2009, height of the financial crisis, and Obama, the president, had gone, talked with reporters. He said, Tim Geithner, who was Treasury Secretary at the time, he's got a plan. He's going to announce it tomorrow. You guys are going to love it. Like, he literally said those words. And then, because we were a little inexperienced, Geithner had agreed to give the speech during market hours, which, by the way, you should not do as a Treasury Secretary. Yeah. But Geithner was speaking in this big fancy room in the Treasury at noon the next day. And I think the S&P 500 dropped 20 points during the speech. Oh my gosh. As people realized that our plan was, we're going to try a lot of things. Yeah. We have a lot of creative ideas, and we're going to see how we can get through this crisis, as opposed to, here's the silver bullet, we figured it all out. And so that was the first first couple of weeks of my time at Treasury. And actually, at the same time, Sanjib, I actually was mostly not working on those programs. I was working on what became Dodd-Frank when it was a blank sheet of paper. So there was a meeting with Geithner and me, the Treasury chief of staff and a person who was later the head of supervision at the Fed. And Geithner said to us, like, after we're done with this crisis, we're going to have to reform the financial system. I want you guys to go start thinking about that. So that was the start of Dodd-Frank.
That's amazing. Amazing. And it's, you literally were at the front row.
Yeah, totally. I mean, some people would say like architect this and that. I would say, I don't know that I had the most ideas, but I definitely did the most typing in the Obama policy papers that led to Dodd-Frank.
That's amazing. And so given that, like, and where fintech is now, like, how do you sort of think about, the macro environment now versus the macro environment back then?
Yeah, look, I think it's sometimes easy to forget, because it all sort of worked out, that we were very afraid that we would end up in a Great Depression. And the recession that followed the global financial crisis was terrible. And we are living in the world that follows from these types of financial crisis-oriented recessions.
Yeah.
But relative to historical experience and relative to other countries, we did amazingly well. And I think it's really hard for Americans sometimes to remember that, because our experience was terrible.
Yeah.
But relative to Europe or Greece, I mean, Greece was almost destroyed. I mean, GDP dropped by a quarter in Greece 3 years after the financial crisis, right? So if you think about the debt crisis in Europe or other challenges that other countries have had, we came through with flying colors.
Yeah.
It was a terrible experience. So I think one of the things that people sometimes have a hard time understanding is literally how much better it is now than it was.
Yeah.
And the other thing, again, this is sort of an untold story, but from the White House's perspective in 2009, the reason we wanted to advance Dodd-Frank is because we thought we might not have enough money to save the banking system. TARP was $700 billion. By February of 2009, it wasn't clear whether Citi was going to need a bailout, whether Bank of America was going to need a bailout. AIG did need another bailout. And if all three of those things happened, who knows whether JP Morgan survives, who knows whether Goldman survives. And if those five things happen, all of a sudden, $700 billion starts to look like pennies relative to the scale of the problem. So I think just the depth of uncertainty that we had and the depth of fear is really hard for people to remember, because what they remember is that we got it through.
Just to add to that depth of fear, I don't know if we've ever actually talked about this, but I was at Citi at that time.
Yeah.
I was working on our credit card portfolio, one of the largest credit card portfolios in the world, and there was fear.
Yeah.
And, for example,
nobody knew the price of anything.
Yes.
Right? Is there any, the question that was being asked was, is there any amount of dollars you would be willing to pay to buy a collection of mortgage bonds? And the answer for many days in the spring of 2009 was no. There was literally no price, zero.
But taking back to that, to where we are now, like, I'm actually, in retrospect, I'm happy about how that market opened up, the market changes opened up opportunity for, like, fintechs.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And for new ways of doing financial services, new ways of, evaluating risk, or actually thinking more strongly about how do you evaluate risk.
Yeah, and I think, for me, one of the things that's really exciting about, you asked a question, but I'll answer it a slightly different way, like being in government to being in venture, how are those two things linked? And the thing that really links them is we were making high stakes decisions with very little data. And there was no model that you could look to say, if we change the law in this way, what will happen? Because all of finance exists within the structure of the law. So you change the law, you cannot predict what's going to happen. So you have to make educated guesses. And that's a lot like startup, right? Should we spend more effort going after enterprise? Should we spend more effort going on SMB? You only know by trying it. There's no model that can tell you where product market fit is. It's behind door number one, door number two. And then the other thing related to that is I always think about my career as searching for levers, right? The old adage about, like, give me a long enough pole and I can move the earth, right? I can lift the earth. And I think of, government policy as an incredibly long lever, right? You can change a lot with a little. And VC is actually the same way. The idea that in our job, a $2 million check might be the difference between, the next Stripe or, think about NVIDIA, right? Whatever your favorite startup is, the next Credit Karma here at QED, right? Like nobody wanted to fund Credit Karma. They didn't understand it. We wrote a $2 million check into Credit Karma. And look what it became in terms of financial access and financial education. So when I think about policy and VC, they actually are more similar than I think people realize, because if you're lucky enough, as I was, to be in government when policy was being made, so not just regulation around the edge, it's not just administrating, but like really we have the opportunity to rewrite the laws. That is similar to venture in terms of the amount of uncertainty and the amount of dynamism that can come from really small changes.
I love what you're saying about like being at the place where things are actually happening, and at the time that things are actually happening.
That's right.
And I know you were at Fintech Meetup earlier this year. Wanted to ask you, like, what was that experience like, and also if you could give a little bit of context about like the seasonality of being a VC.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so I think first of all, it was great to be back in person, and I think even in 2024, we sort of still feel that, right? It was the third Fintech Meetup and the second in person, and having participated in the Zoom version of Fintech Meetup, which was a valiant effort. Let me just say it was great to be back in person. And I think, what people sometimes don't realize, because it's technically true that, a great deal might land in your inbox on any day of the year. As a practical matter, there's really two fundraising seasons. There's fall and spring, right? We would never tell our companies to start a fundraise the last week in July, right? Or the first week in August. Too many people are on vacation. There's too much room for distraction. What if, you get excited, they get excited, but then, the partner that you need to vote in the investment committee is out the next week. You can really drag. And so I think, so I do think there's a real seasonality, right? Everybody comes back to school in September. They're reading the pitch text. They're trying to figure out. And then the fall conference season is where you're getting to press the flesh. You're getting to see people. You're getting to evaluate. You're in a very concentrated environment to gossip. Hey, I just met company X. Like, have you heard of that company X? Do they sound cool? And you can start to feel this buzz or this validation. I've got a company on my plate selling enterprise software. Well, if I'm at a conference, it's a lot easier to get to heads of innovation, 5 in a day. Hey, I want to go find that person. Hey, ask about this company, blah, blah, blah. So I think that's the first thing. And then I think what Fintech Meetup really did is it just took over that spring location in the calendar, right? To say like, coming back after Christmas break, it's January, it's February, getting pitch decks, we're trying to figure it out. And then, you're really hitting that moment of you've got some next year data, you're thinking about the deals you want to do, and Fintech Meetup has come to occupy that space in the spring calendar when you're going to see everybody, you're going to rapidly get a feel for, okay, this is actually an exciting company, right? I met them earlier today, or I have been talking to them for weeks. I now meet them in person. I really like the way we hit it off. I could imagine working together. And then I'd go to the cocktail party and I mention it to you. And now all of a sudden you can say, oh yeah, no, that guy is really amazing. Or I met him 3 years ago and it's amazing what they've built. Whatever the stories are, you can very quickly get that if you're in person. And I do think that Fintech Meetup has come to sort of occupy that space in the spring season, so to speak.
That's wonderful. And from your experience earlier this year, like, were there any outcomes that you wanted to talk about or highlight?
Yeah, I don't know that, I don't think I did the deal because of Fintech Meetup, but what I think in this business, what we're constantly doing is just writing cheap options, right? So we're going to sit down, and every time you make a connection with someone, you're really just reminding them that you exist. And that can sound cynical, but that is the game, right? So, what I say in a conference is, I'm going to sit down and I really just want one agreement from you. If there's something that we should do together, will you remember that we should do it together? Right? So even a conversation like this, it's like, Hey, Sanjib, if there's a panel that I would be a good speaker for, will you remember to put me on the panel? And all you have to say is, yes, not, I will put you on a panel. I'm not even asking. I'm saying, if there's a panel that I think you would be good for, I will put you on it. If there's a founder that you meet that you think I would like, will you remember to introduce me in addition to whoever else you remember to introduce them? And I think at some level, that's all you can really achieve in conferences, but it's more hopeful than cynical, right? Because it's the way to get that conversation, that agreement with 200, 300, 400 people over the course of a couple of days. And in the real world, that's what you need in life. Hey, remember me, right? When you see an exciting company, send them to me. When you see something that you think I would like, send it to me. And it's really that simple. So that's how I think about a place like this, is just, you're just getting that agreement in a hyper concentrated way.
Amazing. And any final thoughts you want to leave our audience with?
For sure. I think, because I don't think you can have a conversation these days without talking about AI, I want to sort of offer a framework about fintech and AI that I think may be interesting to people, which is, at some level, if you think about our jobs being dominated by the fear of missing out, I'm jealous of generalist investors with their ability to pivot from hot fintech to hot AI. But we're fintech specialists. And the thing that I'm seeing and really excited about is a theme I call inverted AI. So instead of asking the question, how can I invest into the power of AI? I say, given that AI is going to be powerful in our economy, what does the world need? So for example, a week ago, I published a blog post with a machine learning researcher and VC about how does the payment system need to change if bots are making the payments? Because you and I both know today, if a bot is making the payment, it's probably fraud. And so if we actually want to empower bots for its recurring payments, which have a separate code, but if we want to empower bots to make payments on our behalf, what needs to change from a fraud modality, from a merchant acquiring modality, from an identity modality? And I think none of that actually requires AI, but it's something the world will need because AI is going to change the world. And so I've been spending a lot of time thinking about that theme recently. And so, like I say, if there's anything that is like that you think I'd be interested in, remember to send it to me.
Absolutely. I will absolutely do that. And Amias, as always, it's always a pleasure. And thank you for not being a bot.
Thank you. Thanks for being in person.